Palestinians is imminent. Any day now, Palestinians will start starving, or at least that's what we've been hearing for, well, since October 7, basically for 10 months straight. So many plans have been put in place to try to prevent that. One of them being this Biden's sort of peer plan, basically getting in aid just directly by the sea, which has not really worked. So we'll talk about that, and we'll also talk about one aspect of it that I think is very telling about basically what the world or sort of the West, how they really feel about helping the Palestinians, if we want to call it that. But also, welcome to the Daily Objective. I always forgot to, since I don't start no longer with welcome to the Daily Objective, I forgot to say it later. But joining me today is James. So, James, would you like to tell us a little bit about this 230 million plan?
$230 million boondoggle, but it's much, much worse than a boondoggle. The Agency for International Development, which distributes most of the foreign aid that America gives to various countries in the world, had, previous to Biden announcing this plan, warned the president that it wouldn't work, had told him it wouldn't work. And there were multiple reasons why it wouldn't work. One, the weather, the just the tides and the potential storms and currents. The other, of course, security issues. Now, despite all that, President Biden went ahead and announced it in the State of the Union address because he wanted something, as the pro-Hamas wing of the Democratic Party was starting to give all kinds of trouble and wanting restrictions on the aid to Israel, or in fact, total divestment in Israel, if you go by the squad and some of these protesters' desires. So Biden had to throw a bone, in effect, politically to the left, to the pro-Hamas left. And that was this. So whether or not it would work was beside the point. So it's a sort of Kantian approach to ethics here. Good intentions are more important than actually delivering any aid. Now, they wanted the port to be, I guess, in northern Gaza, but they decided to put it in central Gaza. That wasn't a big problem for the world. No one, mind you, stepped up to help here. The UN said it would that it was in favor of it until Israel used the port, apparently, for hostage rescue operations. We can't have that. That's obviously inconsistent with anything the United Nations wants to see done. And that would show that this was a pro-Israel, I guess, aid port. So that would be a valid reason to cut off the food that they say is so desperately needed in Gaza. In any case, this giant boondoggle only operated for 3 weeks, for about 3 weeks. And even in that time, it was delivering a fraction of the aid that it was supposed to have delivered. So it was a giant failure, and it never got UN support either. But the important thing is that we impress the world. It's sort of a global politics, social metaphysics. For people who are fans of Ayn Rand, they know what I mean here. So long as we give the right impression to the world, they don't want to really necessarily be humanitarians, but they want to be thought of as great humanitarians. If I can paraphrase the line from The Fountainhead, contrasting Peter Keating and Howard Rourke. Peter Keating, who wanted to be thought of as a great architect, and Howard Rourke, who wanted to be a great architect. Well, you have a similar thing here. So long as Biden is thought of as a humanitarian, so long as everyone believes his heart is in the right place. Now, getting aid to Hamas is a separate thing altogether. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're aiding Hamas. They're feeding
Yeah,
Hamas.
let's actually
Sure.
talk about that a bit later, because I just wanna just to quickly go over some. So a report basically came out about this whole situation, and I really hate the way report is written because there's so many anagrams that I had to Google every single one. Um, but so I think one of the most telling thing was, and this is I'm reading from the report itself. A senior, and this is Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance official, said Department of Defense explored several options in coordination with the United States Agency for International Development and interagency stakeholders. In the end, no third party agreed to provide security, and as a result, the IDF provided security for Model C operations for joint logistics over the shore. The JLOTS, Joint Logistics Over the Shore, is the name that was given to this pier. So basically, United States was asking, okay, we now have this built, or basically we now have this, in a sense, in the works. We ask you to, we ask some third party to provide security, because apparently if IDF was given charge over the security, it would be viewed as sort of the conflict of interest, or it would be viewed as this is not basically like a third party thing, or basically like an independent run, and it would be in a sense controlled by IDF. But no one stood up, no one cared. We've been hearing about, as I said at the start, we've been hearing about the starvation for Palestinians. We've been hearing about the humanitarian tragedy. We've been hearing all this about it. Yet when it's now time to basically provide, not even provide the humanitarian assistance, not even provide the humanitarian aid, just provide security for the humanitarian aid to come in, no one signed up. No one signed up, in besides IDF, which IDF has always stood up when it came to providing humanitarian support to their enemies, which is a second point we will go to. But James, anything you'd like to add? I'll just maybe add. So yeah, no one really wants to deliver aid, and I think it makes sense, because no one really cares about the Palestinian suffering. The only thing they care about is basically hurting Israel. Whichever way they can hurt Israel, they will pick it. And if they can say there is no humanitarian aid provided to Palestinians, they can blame Israel for it. It doesn't matter that Hamas steals the aid. It doesn't matter that Hamas uses the aid trucks to hide their terrorists. It doesn't matter that many of these organizations have some links to Hamas. It's always Israel's fault.
Always, always and forever, and it must be. And we can't allow Israel to get any credit. And so what you just described is a gem, isn't it? I think basically there are two nations in the world: those who just don't care, and those who are actively and mostly in the United Nations, with a handful of possible exceptions here. They fall into two categories. The first that I mentioned, and the second, pro-Hamas. And they'd rather the Gazans starve, literally. Hamas would rather its people die. For every dead person that they can blame on Israel, that's something that they're seeking. They're seeking. Now, of course, for almost 11 months now, in about a week or 10 days, it'll now be 11 months, the better part of a year since this has happened. Where's the starvation? We keep being told that there's this humanitarian crisis. They're on the verge of a humanitarian crisis. We've been on the verge of a humanitarian crisis now for almost 11 months. And so that's crazy, right, in itself. But you see, if you ask, would you please help us do security? Because people might find Israeli security to be untoward, problematic. No one will step up, because they don't really want why would they want there to be relief for this humanitarian crisis? This humanitarian crisis is their big PR against Israel. They want this humanitarian, or the perceived perception of a humanitarian crisis that hasn't ever quite materialized in the way they said it would, but they want it. Hamas wants the humanitarian crisis. Now, those nations that thought, well, gee, this could deliver aid, why would they provide security? And then notice what happens when Israel provides the security to deliver aid to Gazans. Now, what the heck is Israel even thinking, helping aid go to the enemy? As we pointed out, it is the Palestinian people who are the enemy. and they're agents of Hamas by and large. Certainly the adults are. But in any case, Israel, in its own altruistic foolishness, is trying to help by providing security for the construction and maintenance of this pier. But we can't have that, can we? Can't have that, can we? If Israel, and see, notice that's how the excuse that the UN uses to pull any support for the pier. Israel is using it, man, and they might be using it to rescue hostages or something really bad like that. Now that would be a big PR feather for Israel, and that is worse than anything. We would much rather there be starving people. If that was ever going to actually be the case, we would much rather there be a humanitarian crisis and people starve in Gaza than Israel get any credit in this ridiculous PR humanitarian battle over who's more altruistic than the other guy. Absolutely disgusting. It's like layers of philosophical corruption that your mind has to be in to get to this state. They would rather, no one would provide security for this. And if Israel does use it in any way, well, that's it. We'd much rather the Gazan starve, right? That's how their priorities obviously work. So it's like with Biden back in the White House. Well, so long as everyone knows I'm trying, so long as I'm throwing a bone to my Hamas left in this country, and they think my heart's in the right direction, then of course that's fine. But no, Israel. The minute it looks like Israel might be using this or might be getting any credit for it, no, we'd much rather the Palestinians starve. Is literally their position.
We have a super chat from Wes, thank you so much, and a super chat from Jonathan, thank you so much. And Jesse in the chat is asking, doesn't the UN have troops? If they want this so bad, why aren't the UN forces doing this? So this is a US plan, technically. But UN does have their peacekeeping forces, but I think, and it's kind of like, it's kind of dystopian. Their peacekeeping forces are called are part of the Department of Peace Operations, which is kind of weird to call like your soldiers peace operations. But I think it's a special action that can only the Security Council have. So if anything like that would happen, it would have to be the Security Council. And I don't know. I don't know why I'm using
And
them.
the history of these UN peacekeepers does not inspire any confidence. They have been mired in charges of corruption and abuse.
Especially when
Time,
it comes to
yeah.
Israel.
Well, yeah, especially when, but you point out a very practical concern. In the first instance, the Security Council would have to approve the actual use of these UN peacekeeper forces. But these UN peacekeeper forces are, it's a mess. The charge, I mean, many instances, they have been caught in corruption, abuse, and worse. So no, I wouldn't put any faith. Quite the opposite. I would want them out and not involved. But the thing is that it's not really peace that the international community wants. All these people who vote against Israel, they want this perpetual war. And so anything that might actually, bring about peace, that's not going to be on the agenda. And I wouldn't trust these UN peacekeepers to do it anyway.
Yeah, and if you go into past, and I think more than half a year, I actually was thinking like US peacekeeping forces, if they, let's say, guarded the Gaza border or something like that, which is a similar situation that is in Cyprus, in mind, it didn't sound that bad. And then I went into where the UN peacekeeping forces ever used in Israeli region, and there were. Before the Six-Day War, they were UN peacekeeping forces in Egypt, basically to try to prevent any conflict between Israel and Egypt. What did Egypt do? It just dismissed them and they went away. So these do not work. And it's similar to Lebanon. In Lebanon, also the UN peacekeeping forces were supposed to keep peace. Yet again, they were just dismissed. And yeah, it's this sort of like complete. I mean, just the fact that when it comes to UN peacekeeping forces, it has to be something that China, Russia, USA, France, and UK have to agree on. Anything these five countries can agree on, it's either so bad that even countries like Russia and China will basically, and I think there were instances, I think when it came to certain situations in Yemen, I think some groups there were like so bad that even China and Russia were sort of like, okay, maybe we have to do something. But when it comes to Israel, I wouldn't ever expect, especially since we know Hamas has connections to Iran, which is very good friends with Russia, particularly. Not to mention, Russia does have many of their own interest, especially in Syria, but basically all over the Middle East. So I wouldn't expect UN peacekeeping forces to ever be used for anything good from our point of view, especially when it comes to Israel. Anything you'd like to say before I go back to the topic?
Well, the United Nations the League of Nations was a big fat failure, wasn't it? The equivalent body between World War I and World War II. It didn't prevent World War II, quite the opposite. It helped Hitler foster and come to power. And similarly,
Actually, just quickly, there was one conflict that it tried to resolve beforehand, and I want to do a little bit of research because there was a war between Ethiopia, or what used to be called Abyssinia, I think, and Italy. And League of Nations was trying to resolve that conflict, and it also pretty much didn't work out because you cannot negotiate with terrorists, which was the Italian state at the time. It was already taken over by Mussolini. But I just if
oh
anyone
no,
wants to see the precursor of United Nations and how it works. And yeah,
the League of Nations really helped authoritarian and totalitarian nations during that period, and it sure didn't prevent another world war from breaking out. And while we haven't yet had another world war under the UN regime, their attempts at peacekeeping have been uniformly disastrous, uniform failures, and they can't prevent any real war. I mean, look what's going on in Ukraine and Russia right now. Has the United Nations ever been able to prevent that? And look, as you point out, the nation can simply dismiss the UN peacekeeping forces. It's a violation. They're the sovereign of that country, and they can kick out anyone they want. It's really only done with the sufferance of the country involved anyway. There is no teeth, the enforcement teeth to this, but it's a giant failure. The UN is by design, it's all about world peace and protecting the territorial integrity of the existing member states, which means it's been a protection racket, as I've put it, for dictatorships and terrorist organizations since the beginning. That's what it's all about.
and as Jesse points out really well in the chat, keeping the status quo isn't the same as keeping peace. I would say it more as peace doesn't is might not necessarily be something desirable. Europe in 1941 wasn't a desirable status quo to be left at. It
Yeah.
had to be changed.
Yeah, ask Poland, ask Belgium, ask France, right? As Germany invades them various times in the 20th century. No, peace is not the goal at every time. No, that the bad guys want peace in certain moments, in certain contexts. But if you really want peace, what you allow is real self-defense. You don't stop, you don't tie Israel's hands like the international opinion has been doing. That thwarts real peace. You don't fear an escalation with Iran if you want real peace. You take out the Ayatollah and his government if you want peace. If peace is your goal, you cannot have Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, obviously operating in this region, can you? If you want peace, you can't sanction Russia, who twice in the last 10 years has invaded Ukraine. No, you can't. No, you can't. It is inconsistent to have a dictatorship be a member of the United Nations and claim that the organization is for world peace. That's a bizarre contradiction.
And returning to the topic, I think if at the end of the day, I think the worst part about this is the fact that IDF in the end did help with this. I think Israel has to realize that, yeah, the Palestinian people are the enemy. I think you said earlier that Palestinians are agents of Hamas. Hamas are agents of the Palestinians. They have elected it, and they have never revolted against it. They've never stood up against Hamas. When we hear anyone standing up, it's a sole man just pretty much yelling into the abyss because no one is listening. No one else is there to stand up with him. Palestinians are holding the hostages. We found hostages in the house. We found hostages in the houses of the uh, of the Palestinians. As we know, also Hamas has many connections in UNRWA, which is the organization on the ground. And when it comes to humanitarian aid, something I think something really interesting I've read about the World War II when it came to Japan specifically is that United States used starvation as a tactic, and it was one of the reasons why Japan has surrendered relatively. Like Japan would be fighting for a long time. One of the reasons it did surrender, one part of it was the fact that the population was literally starving, like actually not what it's happening now. Now with the Palestinians, and I think something similar has to be Palestinians have to feel something similar. I've just seen like a video Owen Jones was sharing, and now I'm mentioning Owen Jones, not Razi. That's because Razi hasn't been on in a while, so I have to mention him. Uh, but Owen Jones was sharing basically there was like a TikToker in Gaza, basically like sharing his daily life. He had like an iPhone and he had access to internet. They had access to anything, and he was pretty much sharing his daily life. And again, this is like that shouldn't happen. Like every single person, besides of course the children, are responsible for the governing body, and for what has happened. Hamas is engaged in terrorism against Israel. It As a governing body of Gaza, it has declared war on Israel, and the people in there support it. I mean, we still know from the polls, majority of Palestinians are still supporting October 7th. And the major reason is they don't feel any sense of the war. They don't feel like they're at war. They'll just be moved around at all the time. They'll just be put into humanitarian camps. Humanitarian aid will be delivered to them, and after this, whatever happens, they'll just continue with believing what they believed before, which is they believe in the destruction of Israel, and nothing has changed for them because they didn't feel the what it means to be in war. It reminds me of the when during the American Civil War, when General Sherman, his goal was go into the South, meaning like go into the populations, make the civilian population feel that they are at war and that they've engaged in the war with a free nation, and that there are consequences for that.
Hamas cannot operate without substantial support. It cannot. The support is plain. But besides, they are the ones in control of all the aid that is going in. So much aid comes in. They'll airdrop it if necessary. They'll come in overland. But who is in control of that aid? Hamas in the first instance. But even insofar as it's feeding the people, they're the people who are supporting Hamas. But of course, it's all really going through, by the way, even if it were going to the population, the tactic that you're talking about is perfectly valid and moral. It might have brought an end to this conflict months and months and months ago. And everybody's suffering had we dealt with this properly and made the population suffer as a result of their support for Hamas. We need them to clamor for the end of Hamas, and that will never happen if the population doesn't feel the consequences, as you point out. But in this instance, it's even worse because humanitarian suffering is Hamas's PR strategy. It's their strategy, and they're the first ones who get their hands on the aid. So this aid is directly feeding the enemy. I mean, it would be even worse than if, say, you could sneak in food to only the people. Let's say we could sneak in food to only the people who were resisting Nazi Germany. That would be a very dangerous thing in itself, because the food might end up in the hands of supporting Germany. But we're not talking about even that kind of a fantasy science fiction hypothetical. In this case, we actually know that the aid is going straight to the enemy. So all this humanitarian relief is pro-Hamas aid, aid to help Hamas continue to lob rockets and plan the next October 7th, from what I can tell. And yes, insulate their own population from any real suffering, give a huge amount of aid to Hamas, and still have Israel be the bad guy for starving people and doing this genocide. Insanity. Insanity. And yet the world community just goes right along with it.
So yesterday we have talked about the hostage that IDF has rescued. More information has came out, so we will be talking about that on the reality show. There is also a protest or demonstration planned of the hostage families to go to the border of Gaza and sort of like on the speaker speak to the hostages that are still kept in Gaza. So we will be talking about that and basically the whole situation all around. So a link to that is in the chat. Thank you, James, for joining me today. Thank you, everyone else, for watching, and we'll see you in just a few minutes on the reality show. Bye-bye.